Welcome back to today's episode of Unapologetic Living. I am super excited to have Alex Brayton with me today. He is an executive and healthcare consultant.
Consulting.
Okay.
Call it that.
But I met Alex through, I'm a massage therapist, and I met him through an appointment, and he was very I don't know. He was inspiring, as he was one of the first clients that I have had who was really open in sharing his personal story with recovery from alcohol. And so I'm really glad to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Yes, no, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, tell me a little bit about, I know you shared a lot with me that day, and which is why I reached out, is I think it's an important, I found it just inspiring for one, but I think it's important information just to share with others, because I know that, alcohol is a tricky thing. Um, I've been almost sober for 21 months next week. Uh,
Great.
and I don't really think that I wouldn't have considered it a problem, though in my 20s, I definitely could put down some beer. But as I have raised kids, and they definitely, I would pop that beer open at dinner time, oftentimes just to relax once their dad got home. And it became just a very regular part of our life. But then as time went on, like I ended up with maybe like 4 to 6 drinks a year. And then I was like, I'm at this wedding, and I woke up feeling kind of crappy the next day. I'm like, gosh, I could have just felt better had I not had that alcohol. And so I just decided to commit to a year of no alcohol. And then the year hit, and I was like, well, gosh, how am I going to celebrate a year? Because because the idea of having a drink didn't sound like the way to celebrate.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, I would love for you to share, what you share with me. It's not going to come out exactly the same, but
No, of course. And I mean, look, I think to anybody who kind of is curious or asks questions when it's, revealed through hopefully usually natural conversation that I don't drink, the often follow-up question is, well, why? Or really, as a, somewhat younger guy, the questions are often either around, is it a religious conviction? Is it a moral decision? And then of course the maybe more obvious is, are you in recovery? And so I think unfortunately, for one reason or a million, there are, certainly heavy stigmas around addiction and alcoholism in our society still today. And so people are fearful around mentioning that they are alcoholic or addict. And even if that, is a person who's in long-term recovery, there's still some doubt of how people might react to just the label of, well, I don't drink because I'm an alcoholic, which is the case for me. And I'm not, at this point in my life, ashamed of that fact. Now, there are parts of my past and of my story that I certainly are not proud of, but I don't think there's a person on earth that has an entire life story that they can't point back to something that they wish they hadn't done or said or been a part of. And so, to live in constant worry of how others will judge or perceive me is kind of a non-starter as far as how I'm going to go forward in life. And so when somebody asks me, I'm usually, maybe to a fault, pretty transparent and straightforward. Um, I think, you know, it's important here or anywhere else that I mention that, I'm certainly not an expert on addiction or alcoholism. I only have my own experience to come from, and that of the many men and women I've come to know and their stories through my own journey in recovery. But I'm not a physician, I'm not a clinician, I'm not an addiction specialist, and I certainly don't speak for, programs like Alcoholics Anonymous. I speak for me. And I say that because it's important that, anybody's sharing their story and kind of making it, about their journey in recovery, which happens to be 12-step focused, as I think most should be, but that's my own personal opinion. That, let's say, God forbid, I should relapse or should go back to drinking, if somebody were to point to this conversation, they might say, well, obviously AA is not working for him, so why would I try it, right? And so that's an important reason why there is some anonymity there. And so when I speak here, I'm not speaking as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, just as a person in recovery. But Alcoholics Anonymous is a huge part of my story and how I maintain my sobriety today. I'm a little over 9 years sober. My sobriety date is June 12th of 2015. Um, I, had a pretty messy, lengthy journey of trying to get and stay sober. Mostly because of an unwillingness and an inability to accept the fact that I could never, ever drink safely. And that any time I would drink, it was going to be ugly and bad. And I was always kind of leaning on past experiences because, like any disease, it progresses over time. And so, I told myself, well, I used to be able to just have a couple of beers with dinner. So I obviously know how to do that. So I can still do that. But the problem is, pointing to the past times when I was able to was not the same as, pointing to the time today. I mean, it progresses to the point where it's silly to use past experience to justify current behavior or future behavior. And so I kept leaning on that, which is a great obsession of all of us who are struggling in early days of recovery and addiction. I've learned my lesson this time. I won't do that next time. I'll control myself better this time. And I did that over and over and over again. To the point where it then becomes kind of utterly and incomprehensibly, as they say, demoralizing. And you get to the point of almost just kind of saying, what's the point anyway? I can't stop, so why stop? And so then it becomes kind of self-fulfilling, as it did for me. And my journey was ugly. And it caused a lot of wreckage for people who I love and care about. But ultimately, I kept at it and have been able to maintain sobriety again since 2015, which has been an absolutely incredible ride. All the things they promised and said would happen if I would stay sober and stay in the program are true. I laughed people out of the room when they told me those things, didn't think they applied to me, didn't think they could apply to me. And here I am, a little over 9 years sober, beautiful wife, newly married, wife who's never seen me drink. Um, and most importantly, still working on myself and continuously trying to improve through the principles of recovery. Stopping drinking was, the first phase of the rest of my life. And it has been, strangely enough, as crazy it is to say, because of how much pain and chaos it caused, it has been one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me because it gave me this new life in recovery where I am constantly striving to grow, improve, and connect with my higher power, whom I personally choose to call God. Um, and that allows me to face life in ways that I never knew how to before. Whether I avoided uncomfortable feelings, uncomfortable situations, it could be as big or as small as a loss of a loved one who might have passed, and that horrible pain, to an uncomfortable social situation. But whatever it might be, finding that coping mechanism, my solution to all of those discomforts was alcohol. And when I didn't have alcohol, I start turning to other things, whether it's the food and sweets and sugars, or whether it's shopping, or whether it's sex, and all of the things that we, I think, as humans start to kind of try to rely on to make ourselves feel comfortable and happy and get that serotonin boost, or whatever neurotransmitter it might be, that endorphin that we need to make ourselves feel better and happy in a situation when we might not otherwise. Alcohol was my solution to that for years and years and years. And so take that away, I was lost. I didn't know where to go and what to do. And now I have found a path that is getting me every day more and more healthy. My problem today, and the reason I continue in the 12-step program, is not because I'm struggling to not drink today or yesterday or tomorrow. Um, while I do believe that if I don't continue, I could fall back into old habits that would eventually lead back to drinking. My reason for remaining active in recovery is because it is a continuous process of growth and improvement, and spiritual growth, most importantly, which again allow me to put aside those default solutions, whatever they might be, and live in a way that is much healthier, more vulnerable, more real, and face the struggles and issues and pains and joys that come with life without needing to escape them through some sort of chemical influx. And that chemical could mean literally putting a chemical into my body, or it could mean doing something that shoots those chemicals through my brain because it makes me feel better. And so I love this way of living. It's been, a great sense of pride, despite the shame that many and that I had for so many years. And I love sharing it with people, not because I think that I'm some sort of great example necessarily, but because I want to do my little part in hoping that other people will realize that being an alcoholic, which I am, is not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be um, also not advertised. I don't walk around with a big T-shirt on that says, "Look at me, I'm an alcoholic." But I do, when asked the question, answer with transparency and honesty.
So now, when you talk about shame, did you recognize that you were carrying the shame while still drinking, or did you start to sort of like dig a little bit deeper and unpack some of that, like
Yeah,
because
I mean,
through the program?
I I was such a wreck while drinking. Like I was so unable to even put my finger on what I was feeling or thinking. So no, I would say during my drinking, I mean, I had moments of definite guilt around moments of lapses in judgment, whether it was driving intoxicated, which, unfortunately I have done, or whether it was, raising my voice at someone when I shouldn't have, or whether it was missing an appointment that I was supposed to be at, all of those types of things. And there are millions of examples, better or worse, like, yeah, there was guilt around some of those specific behaviors, but I don't think I had really labeled it as shame at that point. I think there was still this like giant wall of armor that I had up, that I had convinced myself that I was fine, that I was okay, that everybody else was overreacting. And doing so, I also masked what I would have really felt by, drinking to oblivion repeatedly. So if and when those type of feelings, shame, would come up and surface, I immediately would drown them out.
Hmm. So, did you have people along the way mention that they thought that there was a problem? Because I know that can be really sticky for people in homes where there's alcoholism. And I know I like one of the gals that I train Pilates, said it's often the disease of denial.
Hmm.
A lot of people don't think that, they don't want to acknowledge that maybe, it's changing their brain chemistry or they're more irritable. I mean, I can definitely look back now and see where I took things out on my kids when I, maybe was just grouchy because I drank too much the night before. And, you know, I can definitely remember in my 20s, I mean, like, I thank God every day I got pregnant at 23 because it was like, hey, you better change, like, but I was going out and I would write my journal, gosh, I feel terrible, literally every day. And I'd literally go out the next damn night and do the same thing, because
Hmm.
I would go up there, I'd walk right behind to the barn behind me. And it was just, and I slowly, started to make changes, but I knew I wasn't living in an alignment with the way I wanted to live at that time. And so, but I think, as you said, I was masking and didn't even, you don't
A
know necessarily know you're doing it at the time.
100%. And I mean, to your first question, yes, there were definitely people that saw and had concerns. I would say they saw and had concerns probably a good bit before they actually raised them with me. Meaning there was probably that period of talking amongst themselves, my siblings, my mother, significant others, best friends who were like, do you think he's got an issue? Should we say something, or should we just kind of watch and observe and make sure, and so there's going to be that period where people are probably starting to kind of have those quiet whispers about at least, my behavior, and, likely, most who have, signs of some sort of issue of that type, addiction, alcoholism, or whatever it might be. Um, so yes, eventually it was raised to me. And of course, to your point of denial, like I think there was a period of denial where they were denying that they saw an issue. Oh, he's fine. He's just going through this, and once he gets over that, and it's um, from the outside looking in, I mean, I was able to paint a picture, at least for a while, that things were fine, right? From just a pure, keeping a job and having a place, a nice apartment, and I, finished up my MBA, and so kind of moving through these steps that were sort of proof that I was doing okay. Um, I was able to point to those, or others were able to point to those and say, okay, he's, yes, maybe he drinks too much, but everything else is going fine. It's probably he's balancing it well, right? Work hard, play hard, right? Eventually you kind of have to cross that point where I think everybody who's concerned about their loved one does, and they actually raise it. And so, call that an intervention, call that just a sit down, call that a conversation that's uncomfortable. But, I had that with my family. And the first knee-jerk reaction from me, like most, was, you're crazy. What are you talking about? I'm fine. You're overblowing it. It was one bad night, or that was one bad example, and it won't happen like that again. I'm not that bad. And all of that kind of denial and pushing it aside that, I then do. So, it's just kind of a second step in the denial. First, they're kind of denying what they're seeing until they eventually get to the point, the break-even point, or the tipping point where they're able to say, okay, we got to say something to him. And then by that time, I'm still able to say, and push back and push hard, because I wasn't yet willing to do anything or address anything with it. And there's also the difficult component is, drinking. Let's just use that example, stick with the drinking. It's such a normal, common part of our society and culture. And, quite frankly, I mean, drinking to excess is a very young American way of living. And all of my friends in college and in high school, even, for, some more, some less, but pretty much everybody drank to get drunk throughout my late teen to early to mid 20s years. And so drinking alcoholically, as one would define it, was normal. So then you have the question of, like, when does it not become normal? When is it no longer normal? Obviously, some people start settling down, having children like you did, getting married, maybe starting a more serious career. Things start to happen in one's life where they start to have to ease back on that partying life and that drinking life, because of circumstance. But then there are those who, when faced with that need or that decision that it's time to change, or, they can't. And you kind of start to see this crossroads where, 90% of people, they have the kid, get the job, they grow up to that certain age, whatever the step is where they say, I need to tone it down. But 10% of us kind of stay on this path. And, that's because we have this thing, this disease. And, then the time comes where we want to make the decision, or we should make the decision, and we can't. And we literally cannot change our behaviors and our way of thinking in a way that would allow us to, be what others would want us to be, and what we would deep down inside ourselves want us to be as well. And so how do you differentiate, the person who drinks too much at a wedding reception and gets a hangover from the person who is an alcoholic, right? And there is a big difference, but at the same time, I mean, ultimately, if somebody's just trying to make a decision to make themselves happier, healthier, and feel better, who cares how much or for how long somebody drank, if their desire is to learn a healthier, happier way of living. You know, we would welcome you into the rooms that I sit in every week. Nobody's going to say, well, you didn't drink enough to come in here and learn. The only desire, or excuse me, the only requirement for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, and again, just using that example because that's what I choose to utilize for my program of recovery, the only requirement is a desire to stop drinking. It does not mean the requirement is that you are an alcoholic with multiple DUIs, arrests, divorces, lost jobs, and living under a bridge. It is you have a desire to stop drinking. And so, I've met people who have come in and, learned and progressed through that program that, just, were curious and maybe wanted to drink a little bit less, or who, couldn't stop drinking and it was about to kill them, and everything in between. And, so if you're curious, or if you're curious about a loved one, check it out. We don't bite.
Yeah, I know. My first experience was an Al-Anon meeting, and this was like eons ago. And because my dad wasn't a drinker, but he definitely was a workaholic. And, that's another ism in and of itself. He wasn't there.
100%.
He was, married to work and really the golf course, and he wasn't emotionally present for us. And it was his way to cope, I guess. And he still uses that, but my friend was like, come on, you need to come to Al-Anon. And it, proved to be very insightful. Every time I've been, I just gather at least one nugget of information for sure, if not more. And hearing, sitting in a room with other people, because then as I said, my kid's father was an alcoholic. And so, although I didn't grow up with an alcoholic, I know this can be like a family disease. And
Hmm.
that, because of my experience potentially growing up, I attracted in also, somewhat absent partner. And then, of course, I know this trickles down. And as I said, I have a 22 and 18-year-old. I also drive Lyft and Uber. I am around people all the time, every Friday and Saturday night, who are going out to get drunk. I, it's like, how do you, and I don't even know, because obviously it's almost like that's what we've grown up to do as kids. Because I can remember being freaking plastered one night at Rock, Rock the Water Tower or Reggae
Hmm.
Fest. I mean,
Hmm.
stand. And that was, I mean, whenever that was, I don't know. I graduated in 1996 from high school. And, it just like, I just like, when did this become the thing to do? And what would make things different in today's society that could potentially, why is this the thing? Why has this become the like rite of passage, right?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know where it originates. I mean, you go back to, hell, Prohibition years when, drinking became kind of cool, because those who were drinking were sort of skirting the law, and you had the gangster culture and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of kind of when it became the socially normal thing to drink to excess and alcoholically, your guess is as good as mine. As somebody who's so deeply invested in, how drinking affects us, you'd think I would know more about kind of how that happened and took place. I mean, you look at the European cultures, which, yes, they have their pubs and their bars and their club scenes in certain countries that are still, areas where there's plenty of heavy drinking. So not to say Americans are the only people that do that, but um, there's definitely a difference in the American culture from others because, possibly, we are essentially shielded from alcohol for a longer period of time till we're 21, and kind of told, no, you can't, no, you shouldn't, if you do, you get in trouble. And so as soon as you do, it's like, turn on the floodgates. But also like the college and even high school, but certainly the college scene for decades has been, it's cool to be in the party environment. You look at like movies like Animal House from the 70s. I mean, you know, that was kind of the example of what it was to be fun and exciting and have a good college experience. And then, of course, what do high school age kids do? Well, they want to do what the older kids do, and so they're going to start kind of trying to do that themselves. Um, but that's just me kind of spitballing on kind of how it trickled down into our society, where from a young age, most Americans, suburban to rural to urban, their goal from mid-teen years, 16, 17 probably, is, find alcohol for the weekend, get drunk,
Yeah.
um, and then in college, do it even more if they have the chance to go to college. And then those, patterns repeat themselves. It's a rewarding chemical. It's a chance to, let down the stress, and whether you're working hard in a factory job and you get off work, like what other way to just like go home and just like veg out than to have a few drinks or a few too many drinks, and let off some steam by just kind of allowing yourself to not feel, to numb, just numb out. If you're a college kid, then you throw in the college scene and kind of sex culture in college and the inhibitions that go away with drinking, and you combine those two things, they're a perfect recipe for what's supposed to happen in the college environment. And in the young 20s scene at the bars, hookup culture is very real, and alcohol plays a big part in that. And so it's a chicken or the egg, right? Um, are they trying to partake more in hookup culture, and so they drink, or are they drinking more, so therefore they partake more in hookup culture, right?
Right. It really, you're right, because you may not, right? Because I could go back to some experiences I might take away with without the couple of drinks I'd had back in college, so and then I know that many use it because they're insecure, right? It allows them the opportunity, like maybe like well, I mean, they probably think they are showing up in a more vulnerable way in some regards, right?
Mhm.
But in reality, I think deeply believe that we should be able to access those places of ourselves without a number, without a
Absolutely.
it's all in there, right? But we have to have the freedom and comfort. We need to be able to understand ourselves and trust that. I don't know. I don't know if it comes down to like a lack of love or
I mean, speaking as a
self-worth.
man, I mean, that's my own experience. I mean, I know everybody varies in their upbringing. I mean, you mentioned, your father, it sounds like mine was similar. I mean, he was not an alcoholic. He was not a drinker. He might have a beer after work occasionally, but I mean, I never saw my father intoxicated. He passed away in 2007 at only 55, but he was otherwise healthy. It was an unexpected passing, but um, he, he obviously played a big part in how I grew up. And, he came from a New England family, and kind of that kind of stoic male bravado, don't show emotion, don't kind of be vulnerable, certainly not with other men. And um, I think that a lot of males in our culture still are raised that way and still believe that even if it's, you know, to a certain degree, they allow themselves to be a little bit more vulnerable than maybe others. There's still a level of, I'm not supposed to feel this, I'm not supposed to think this, I'm not supposed to show this because I'm a man. And what does that do for a human being? Is it bottles those emotions up, it gives them nowhere to really go. They manifest in unhealthy ways and unhealthy behaviors, and they need something to comfort them because they're not outing them, they're not sharing with somebody else, they're not talking through them with somebody else, they're not processing them appropriately, whether it's grief, whether it's sadness, whether it's anger, whether it's fear, all of those kind of difficult, troubling emotions and thoughts that go through any person's mind. I know for me, I had to find ways to bury and hide those, and I buried those through, trying to, be the superstar student and athlete growing up. And then when that wasn't doing it enough, I didn't really have that outlet. And so, oh, okay, if I don't want to feel these things anymore, what else can I do but, put alcohol in my system? And all of a sudden those feelings start to diminish and they start to hide and they start to go away. And then as soon as they start surfacing up again, I'll have another drink because it'll go back down. And I didn't have another way to share and show those things. I didn't know that it was okay for me to.
Hmm. Yeah, that can, like you, as you said, it can be it doesn't have to be just alcohol at all. It can
No,
definitely be food. I know, like if
100%.
I start on some chocolate on Monday, by Sunday it's the whole bar, right? And I'm getting a
Mhm.
hit from that.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same chemical reaction, truthfully. I mean, obviously the behaviors that come with are somewhat different, that can be more or less dangerous depending on what it is you're choosing.
Hmm.
But anything that we do to excess is going to be at a certain point unhealthy for us. And then ultimately, and maybe most troublingly in my experience, unhealthy and troubling for others, right? That's where it started to become really apparent to me that I needed something to change, because it was bad enough, but not really that bad if it was just affecting me. How many people who drink to excess or drug to excess or video game or gamble to excess, if it's just affecting them and they're not married, they don't have kids, whatever it is, and they say, well, who is it hurting? It's this is my money, or it's my time, or it's my body. So, what does it matter? But when you start to see the real effects trickle out into the people you care most about and you love, you know, that's often the wake up call. That's often the moment of, oh my gosh, like something needs to change here, because now it's not just me. Now it's affecting people that I do care about. And I was okay hurting me. I was okay not feeling okay with me,
Yeah.
but seeing other people hurt is where I start to draw the line.
Yeah, and I think when I remember reading some literature, and because here I was a mom of two children, and I had this, significant other, their father, who was. It's like, okay, what are the signs of an alcoholic, right? I'm like, okay, you start, what, is he an alcoholic? Problem, all these things, right? And then I just realized, okay, like, as soon as I'm doing that, right, Al-Anon would say, get your ass to Al-Anon, right? You're the one with the problem, right? But kind of, but it's just this, I don't know, it's just such a funky dynamic to sort of like live in this realm of trying to, because really, my problem is, I had to start looking at my contribution. But one of the things I do remember is that, is this affecting your relation? Is it affecting the relationships? Um, and I think that's, as you said, it's incredibly important. You don't want to hurt the people that you care the most about.
Absolutely.
They seem to be the ones that get hurt the most.
Oh, no question. I had a really fascinating experience recently where I had never been to an Al-Anon meeting. I had never had a reason to go to an Al-Anon meeting. I didn't grow up in an alcoholic home. My parents are not alcoholic. I had never been in a relationship with an alcoholic. I certainly know a number of people who have become or grown into be alcoholic, and a lot of my friends are recovered alcoholics. But I never had a reason to go to Al-Anon. Al-Anon is for the people that I, as the alcoholic, have affected and hurt, including my own mother and siblings and significant other prior and wife now. I mean, Al-Anon would be where I would direct them, right? If somebody would ask where they should go. And so I'd never been to Al-Anon, and I was asked to speak as a speaker at an Al-Anon meeting recently, and it was really fascinating. Because it's a totally different perspective for them, and certainly speaking to them is a totally different perspective for me. Um, but ultimately, I do believe that. I believe that uh, the Al-Anon sufferer, the wife, the mother, the son, the best friend, whomever it is probably the one who suffers the most. Because if they are a healthier individual, they're not drowning out those emotions and feelings and those hurts. They're living through it as conscious people that are experiencing what I was able to drown myself away from and black myself out and not experience. And so I could, they could tell me how bad it was and how drunk I was, but I wasn't really there.
Mhm.
Um, but the fear, of am I going to get that phone call as a mother that I know my mom had to worry about, and the fear of that for years of when is that phone call going to come that, this time he drank too much, or this time he got behind the wheel and got into an act, whatever it might be. I can't imagine what that would be like. And that is a fear that affects anybody who loves somebody who's struggling with addiction or alcoholism, or, you know, having a place to go to share what you're going through as the loved one, as the struggling, you know, person in the life of somebody who is in a downward spiral, is such a vital part of that journey for, I know my mother it was. I can speak from her direct experience telling me that it was a life-saving activity for her because she didn't know how to process it and deal with it. Um, the natural reaction that most people have is to fix, manage, control, save, right? Whether it's your spouse or your child or whomever who might be struggling with something like this. And what can I do, or what did I do to cause this, right? What should I have done differently? What can I do now to change it and to redirect things and to fix them, make them better, or if I was only good enough and they loved me enough, they would change for me, right? All of those thoughts that I know, not from experience, but I know from people's stories that they go through, are very, I'm sure, heart-wrenching thoughts to have. But the harsh reality is, like, there's nothing my mother, my, exes, my good friends who were around during my drinking years, there's nothing they could have said or done, that would have changed my path in my drinking. It was, uh, a few years of people trying to say, you can't be around me anymore. Doctors saying if you keep drinking, you're likely going to die. I mean, none of that was able to help me change my drinking. It wasn't enough to hear that. I wasn't going to then suddenly change my decision making on that. And so, point being, going to Al-Anon and sharing those thoughts with other men and women who are experiencing them as well, based on what their loved one is going through, is such a incredibly valuable experience, because I'm sure would feel so alone in those beliefs and thoughts.
Yeah, and I was listening. This clip on Instagram popped up with Tucker Carlson and Russell Brand the other day, and Tucker Carlson said he just quit drinking, uh,
Hmm.
and he didn't go to any sort of recovery. And where Russell Brand was saying, "Well, I go every week, I'm out on AA meeting," and he went, "Oh, why? Why? I just love the people, right?" I've heard before, and I don't know if anybody. Well, if they've been going to AA or Al-Anon for 30 years, I mean, it hasn't helped them. Why are they still going, right? But I would imagine, and that you're making friends.
Absolutely. Some of the best friends in the world, who you can
Right.
relate to in ways that I'd never been able to relate to most people. Um, so there's no question. There's great bonds and friendships formed in the rooms of recovery, whether it's Al-Anon. I know my mother is very close with a number of the women that she became close with through, the journey she went through as I was struggling. And similarly, I mean, part of the reason I go every week is because I'm really excited to see those people and, give hugs and say hello and tell jokes and but at the same time, I hate to be cliche, but it's just, like it's just a common kind of analogy. Like it's like a brothers in arm type brotherhood. Like, you form a closeness by going through shit together. And, even if we might have come into this journey at different times in our life and different periods, where, I met my sponsor and he had multiple years of sobriety, and now my sponsees came in after me. But eventually, we all have this closeness through one thing that I lacked for years and years and years was feeling like anybody really understood me and even understood what I thought, what I felt, how I went through life. And now finding a group of people who, are just as freaking crazy as me, but in a good way, and have embraced it in a life worth living, and sharing it with others in a way that makes it enjoyable and peaceful and full of laughter. And it's a great connection, one that I didn't expect or want when I came into try to get to AA. I mean, when I came to AA, it was like just help me. I mean, truth be told, it wasn't help me stop drinking. It was help me stop having the consequences of my drinking. I just wanted to stop my family getting pissed at me and my job telling me I was, going to lose my job, and the legal issues that were coming about. Like, that's all I wanted to stop. It wasn't that I wanted me to change. It wasn't that I wanted my lifestyle or my way of thinking to change. But eventually I got to that point that all of those, steps of the process got me to where, okay, now I actually want to stop drinking. And then just stopping drinking wasn't enough. Now I want to become a better person, a man, a better husband, a better employee, a better manager, a better friend, a better son. And how do I do that? By continuing to grow and improve. And again, AA is not the only way to do those things. But for me as an alcoholic, it was the route that I needed to take to get through that first hurdle of not drinking, and then to be able to kind of address my sick, for lack of a better word, diseased way of processing the world. And needing a solution that was typically unhealthy, and now finding a way to to deal with life in a healthy, productive way.
And I think that's what, that's sort of Al-Anon's message too. The some of the folks that I've been in Al-Anon with, I haven't read the big book of AA. But one gal, she's like, anywhere they use the word drinking, just place the word thinking in there, because our thinking is just as nutty, right? We want to, like you said, fix, manage, control, and save. And we can't do that, right? And we'll spin our wheels at times trying to do those things, losing ourselves in the picture, right? Our addiction can become wanting to fix, manage, control,
Mhm.
and save, and we can't do it, right? Having to let go of that kind of quirky thinking too.
For sure, for sure. I mean, There's no question that there's a lot of similarity, and there's a reason that, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which were, originally the 6 steps of the Oxford group, but translated into kind of a non-religious structure and kind of broken into multiple steps for some that used to be one. Regardless, that process is tried and true and has been replicated across any number of areas of life, whether it's alcohol and the 12 steps of the big book. But now then you got Al-Anon and how, to deal with, your codependency or your issues with fixing, managing, controlling, or feeling responsible for the drinking of someone else. And then you've got, Narcotics Anonymous, you got all of the other chemical anonymous, and then you've got behavior anonymouses, sex addicts anonymous, gambling anonymous. Um, all of those rely on the same 12-step principles. And yes, like they're all sort of compulsivity, addiction minded based, but I'm telling you, the 12 steps, regardless of the use of the word God, which I know shies a lot of people away from it, and I can understand that it is not a religious program, it is a spiritual program. Some people choose to use their religion as their spiritual guide on that, but by no means is it a religious program by any stretch of the imagination. And I think it is so applicable and useful for so many people. For me, I had to go to it. I didn't have another way. I had to be directed to it because it was the only way to save my life. Other people, unfortunately, don't have that cataclysmic event in their life that's going to force them to want and seek something like that in their life. Um, and that's a shame, in my opinion, because it is so wonderfully beneficial to anybody and everybody. I, I think, at its core, it's a way of living honestly, humbly, and in service to others. I mean, that's a beautiful way of living. And that's ultimately, my focus on a daily basis. If I want to try to have a productive, good day, was I honest? Was I selfless? Was I of help to others? Those are the types of questions that I ask myself to really kind of reflect on, was my day good and positive? And on the flip side, was I full of fear? Was I resentful? Did I behave in a way that was harmful to others? And those are the way that I'm able to reflect on my day or my week or my month or my year and determine, if it was good or bad. It used to be things, you know, you know, did I do this or did I not do this? Meaning, um, you know, get my job done and make the money that I was supposed to make or the sale that I was supposed to complete, or did I eat the diet that I was supposed to eat? Those are all good things. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's a different way of determining whether a day was good or bad, successful or unsuccessful. And when I'm focusing on those things that I think are at a higher plane, how I treat people, how I react to life, how I process things that go on, because good things and bad things are going to happen every day, but the difference is how I'm going to react to them. And I used to react to those things by drinking. And if not by drinking, by doing something else that was unhealthy and harmful to myself and ultimately to others. And now I'm able to, win successful, put the principles that I've learned through the big book that you mentioned and apply it anywhere and everywhere. The last thing I'll say on that is, what I like to say to people is, I didn't. So when they ask people like, is that person an alcoholic? They give you a little test, and there's questions about like how much somebody drinks, right? I think just about anybody who drinks in their 18 to 20s years is likely going to fail that test. And if they're honest in the answer, it's going to appear that they drink alcoholically or are an alcoholic. I don't think that's a way to test whether somebody's an alcoholic. Um, there are other ways, but my answer on kind of what is an alcoholic or why alcohol was my solution to my alcoholism. And I drank because I'm an alcoholic. I'm not an alcoholic because I drank, right? So to define me as an alcoholic because I drank this or did that much or couldn't stop drinking, yes, that's the sign and the symptom that proves that there must be a concern and something to be looked at. But ultimately, it resides in here. It's not in doing this. It's in, what goes on in here. And, um, you know, I relied on alcohol to address the craziness that was going on in here. And so trying to find a way of living that calm that down without ingesting all that alcohol was the biggest struggle of my life and now the greatest reward of my life.
So, in addition to Al-Anon and AA and a 12-step program, what other habits have you taken on? Maybe you had some of them before. It sounds like you were, eating healthy or trying. But you mentioned it. Are there activities that you have integrated into your life? Other um, coping techniques such as like breath work or meditation? I don't know. I'm just throwing some out
Sure.
as a
No, it's a
yoga
good
teacher,
question.
but
It's
you
a
might
good
have some.
question. I mean, I would say to each their own in terms of finding the right balance and what things are most beneficial to them in their journey. For me, when I'm healthiest, from a physical standpoint, yes, I'm eating better, I'm sleeping better, I'm exercising. I mean, those are universal truths, of course. Those go without saying, and so that's not unique to my struggle. But it's definitely very acutely noticeable for me. They talk about, especially in early recovery, the warning signs for an alcoholic drinking again are what they refer to as HALT, if you've ever heard that acronym, HALT, which is hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. If you're one of those four things or multiple of those things, you're more at risk of drinking again. So I avoided those situations as best as possible early on in recovery. I don't think about the acronym HALT anymore, but I do know that, eating healthier, sleeping better, exercising is going to just help me be better me. And of course, that results in fewer opportunities to be resentful, angry, fearful, uh, even impulsive to certain degrees. And those types of behaviors are going to ultimately result in me feeling shame and guilt and other things, which is going to ultimately drive me back to drinking. So it's all part of the same process. But now I believe, several degrees away from picking up my next drink. I mean, I've got an unopened bottle of bourbon right here on my desk shelf, right? That's probably a weird thing for an alcoholic to have in their office, but it was a gift from a client, and I've got it there. There's also a bottle of champagne sitting here. It's empty. It's got a date on it from when a big deal took place. So, point being, I don't run and hide from alcohol anymore because I believe several degrees of separation from having my next drink. But there are things that I need to do to stay up here and not move to here, which will then move me to here and move me to here. And so, you mentioned, eating better or eating healthy. Of course, I still have an indulge in too many sweets, and I can catch myself and try to kind of adjust myself. But, the bigger picture items are, around honesty and, living an honest and just service-filled life. And that can mean, being honest and real with my spouse, my wife, and making sure that we are connected and because she's my first line of defense when it comes to anything. She sees me the most. She knows the most about what's going on in my life. She's the quickest to be able to know if my mood has changed or if I seem off or if I'm more angry or more short-tempered or seemingly lethargic. I mean, she can tell that before I can. And so, you know, obviously maintaining that connection and being connected with her is the first line of defense. But my daily activities around ensuring that I am healthier aside from, the standard, eating, sleeping, and exercising in a healthy way. It comes down to, for me, prayer and meditation, more so prayer. My meditation used to be much more kind of a form of prayer, I guess you'd call it. But daily meditation, daily prayer is vital. And I don't necessarily do it in the ways that most would see it as. I mean, for me, it's not on my knees in a special spot. It's not at the church. It's, a quiet conversation with my higher power on my own time. It could be in the middle of a meeting. It could be, here on a Zoom call with a client and I'm not on focus for a moment and I might just kind of with my eyes open, not in some sort of pomp and circumstance. I'm not sitting there like this, but I just am kind of connecting and thinking, and that's my form of prayer. Asking questions and making statements, and it's just natural conversation for me. I'm also always trying to learn. It's a good, productive use of my brain power to be learning. Um, I have a busy mind. I have a mind that likes to be, I'm not ADD, never have been ADD, not diagnosed. Don't think I believe in a way that is ADD like so many struggle with today. So I don't mean that when I say busy. I just mean that it's kind of constantly thirsty. And so, I typically have a book or three on my nightstand, and they're usually not light reading. They're heavier books that are either, spiritual in nature or I'm an economics person, so I read a lot of economics books, type of stuff that, most would call me a nerd or a weirdo for. But it's what's really good for my brain and my mind to not get sort of, I guess, restless and in search of something to fulfill it. So always am trying to be learning and you know, meditating, prayer, they're kind of one and the same for me. And then sort of the basics that we already discussed, the healthy eating and sleeping and exercising.
Yeah, I think those are great ones. And like you said, they're pretty universal and common sense, although they too can be definitely difficult for some, you know, especially when we look around and, the obesity epidemic is what it is. And so, I just think in the movement, just in and of itself, is just so important.
Absolutely. And I don't pretend to realize that, there aren't struggles that others, face that I am fortunate enough not to have to, where, I do work from home. I can get on a Zoom call with you and do this podcast in the middle of a Thursday and kind of have the flexibility to adjust my calendar to what I've got going on in my life. If I need to go to a doctor's appointment or need to help my wife with something or need to take my dogs to the vet or need to mow the lawn, I can adjust my own work schedule. But that also means, I have the ability and the flexibility to, probably uh, take the time to do some of those things like exercising and like eating healthy that others often don't. When your day is jam-packed or you might not have the financial means to buy the more expensive, healthier options. I don't minimize the fact that there are people who struggle with just doing those basic things that we call necessities to be healthy. And that's unfortunate. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother
Oh,
day.
yeah.
But I don't mean to gloss over that as like, yeah, just do those things and you'll be fine. Because I understand that just doing those things is not always as simple and easy as just doing those things.
Mhm. So I know you shared all kinds of awesome information and great insight. What would be like one nugget of information that you would want the audience to take away, especially those who might be looking or considering cultivating a healthier relationship or I don't, a healthier relationship with alcohol? That could mean sobriety, and maybe it doesn't mean sobriety, but even no drinking is cultivating a different relationship, right, with alcohol than maybe one had before. So,
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I would say, I think you've taken a really good approach to it that I would suggest to anybody, which is, um, if you're curious, whether that means you're curious that you have a problem and you shouldn't drink, or whether that means you're curious about what life would be like if you cut back on your drinking or if you didn't drink for a period, just put it to the test. I mean, what better way to determine the effects of that for you than to say, for the month of August, give yourself the rest of July to kind of figure out what that looks like. You can say for the month of August, I'm not going to drink a single sip of alcohol, or I'm going to drink only on Friday, whatever the guidelines you set for yourself as far as the change you want. But like objectively monitor what that looks like. Are there cravings and desires for drinking when you're not allowing yourself to? Are you able to stick to the guidelines and the rules that you told yourself you would? But also, what are the impacts, of the productivity or of the feelings that you have when you didn't drink the night before and you usually would have? Are you feeling better, more energized? Are you getting more done? And just kind of write out the pros and cons. Because don't get me wrong, there are pros when you're able to drink successfully. I mean, alcohol is a successful product in the world for a reason. It has benefits to people. It for many years worked for me in the way that it was meant to. It helped me feel better, more relaxed, more jovial, more, social. It has benefits. So I'm not here to say like alcohol is terrible, never drink alcohol. But if you're somebody who's struggling with that idea of maybe it isn't for me, put it to the test. Tell yourself I'm not going to drink for this period of time and really honestly, objectively take a look at what the effects are, not just on your mindset and on your own mood, but also, were you able to adhere to the guidelines that you established for yourself? call it a diet, if I tell myself I'm not going to eat sugar for a month, was I able to do it or not? And if I didn't, did I lose weight? That's a test for if it was successful. So how do you test whether the alcohol was successful? It's not always as straightforward as that. There's not a number to put to it, but if you can really kind of rate yourself in terms of how you felt, how slept, how you behaved, without alcohol or with the lesser alcohol for a period, then you can maybe determine, whether there's a decision to be made on whether it's the right thing for you to continue utilizing in the way that you have.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, and I mean, just you reminded, I don't know what reminded me, but something you said is I would have these ruminating thoughts, 3 a.m. And we typically over finances. And so,
Hmm.
it was just like, okay, middle of the night, like this isn't fun. I'm not sleeping. And then I would wake up, and I happen to notice, oh, this happens to be the days that I've had alcohol. Even if it was just 2 drinks, like I was
Mhm.
waking up with these ruminating thoughts, this anxiety in the middle of the night that I couldn't, be up
Yep.
2, 3 hours later. And that was one of the reasons that I decided to stop because I can still see that with a little bit of too much sugar. It's too late. If I want my dessert, it needs to be in the afternoon. It's like, so I've created new, right,
Right.
around, but
Yeah,
you start to pay attention.
for sure. But if you don't know to pay attention to it, you don't know to
Right,
like draw that connection.
right,
Without consciously thinking about it, you're not going to realize, oh, those nights when I had those ruminating thoughts at 3 a.m. were happened you're not going to make that connection naturally. And so you have to be sort of, if you ever heard of like what do they call it? Not a removal diet, but they basically
oh, elimination.
elimination
Yeah.
diet.
Mhm.
So kind of think of it as an elimination diet for alcohol. Like, you're eliminating that and what changes because of it. And if you don't change necessarily anything else, you continue with the same sleeping habits in terms of bedtime and wake up time, and you same eating habits and the same exercise habits. You don't change 10 things at once, because then you
Right,
can't figure out what actually effect did it have.
right.
But if you can give yourself a period where the only thing you actually change consciously is alcohol, you might be able to see some effects that you didn't think you would ever have from that change.
Mhm.
And they might not just be physical. And maybe most importantly, they won't be physical. And again, not saying everybody should stop drinking, because not everybody's alcoholic and not everybody has a negative
Yeah.
relationship with alcohol. And that's a beautiful thing for those who can. For a long time, I wished I was one of them.
For those who are curious about Al-Anon, is that website just Alcoholics Anonymous? Do you know? Like
Yeah, I mean, so typically, if you're depending on what city you're in, your city will likely have its own site that will kind of direct you to where you can go find meetings. So,
Mhm.
like, I live in Louisville, Kentucky. So there is a website, and it is literally just, I always forget if it's AA Louisville or Louisville AA, but
Okay.
aalouisville.org. I think it's Louisville AA actually. Um,
Yeah, I'll just include that in the show notes. That way people can find it if they're so
yeah,
curious.
they've actually, when you type in LouisvilleAA.org, it redirects to Lou Kentucky, or LOUKYAA.org. And it's got all the stuff you'd want on there in terms of just like where to start. So there's a meeting finder that you click on, you put in the day of the week, the time of the day, the part of the city, and you can find, where to find a meeting. There's also a resources tab and all that kind of stuff. Al-Anon, again, I'm less familiar with, but I believe, there's a similar site that you
Website.
can go to from a simple Google search. Google search.
Yeah. And is there any other resources that you can think of offhand that might be beneficial?
I mean, I would say if you're really somebody struggling or a loved one is struggling, please know that there are resources to utilize. Those websites are a great starting point, but getting on the phone with somebody or in person with somebody who's more familiar with how to address, active addiction and alcoholism is sometimes critical and pivotal. There are a number of places in most cities that can, support, a lot of people call them treatment centers, rehabs, detoxes, and those are all good names for them because they discuss them, but there are also various types, private ones that require insurance, but there are usually, free ones that are cities funded. And so there are resources available to anybody who's seeking them. But you just have to be willing to seek. And, whether that's going to a meeting and just raising your hand and saying, I'm not even the person who's struggling. It's my son, it's my wife, it's my friend. But I don't know where to go. Somebody will help. I promise you, somebody will help.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Yes, of course. Thanks for asking me. It's funny how these things kind of just come about. I was going to you because I'd injured my leg on a golf trip, and I think the
Yeah,
story came up because everybody on the golf trip was getting hammered and wasted, and I was completely sober the whole time. And so then
yeah.
again, questions come up, and that's that's the way I prefer it. I don't hide, and I'm not secretive about my recovery and the fact that I'm sober, but I don't I don't advertise it and shout it from the rooftops either. And when it comes up in natural conversation, I'm always willing to answer questions. And so I hope this was helpful to any of your listeners that either were curious, wanted to learn more, or potentially have some questions for themselves or somebody they love.
All right. Thanks again, Alex. It was great
You're
seeing you.
welcome. All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Uh-huh.